Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just going to line up a couple of waters here. I meant it. Oh, thank you very much for being here. It's really delightful to see you all, to see so many friends and colleagues from over the years, all here to celebrate this moment, which is absolutely delightful, and also particularly to my family who've supported me for a long time in this process, and no doubt will continue to do so. So I thank you very much for being here. So to the lecture. As I started to think about this paper, I was drawn to reflect on the purpose of it. That is the ritualized marking of a professorship. The expectations of what that means resonated within me, singing perhaps a little too loudly for comfort. Given professorships are part of an institutionalized structure within the university system, I was prompted to consider how dance, and indeed my own dancing, research and teaching, have been implicated within the formation of dance within the university. What does it mean for professorships in dance to exist? What has it meant, and what might it mean for dance to be within the academy? This isn't the first time I've mused on these questions. In 2008, I made a call for papers for a newly conceived Conversations Across the Field, which is a Society of Dance History Scholars publication. And I proposed an issue entitled Entering the Academy. In the call for publications, I encouraged authors to reflect upon the implications for dance when shaped by the needs of the academic institution. I asked, what happens, for example, when choreographic methodologies become home to weekly curricular delivery patterns? How are dance styles and techniques developed and transformed when part of a degree programme? In what ways do the requirements of doctoral studies alter the way in which we reflect upon histories and approach practice? Intersecting with these questions is my long-standing engagement with debates around practice as research, particularly as a mode of doctoral study, and as explored and tested within my own research as a practice-led dancer and improviser. These experiences and interests come together in this selection of video and installation works I've shared for you today. The works, as you see, could not have been possible without my colleague and good friend Jane Baker, and I'm not quite sure where she is, who for many a year, 18 I think, we've directed the choreographic lab together. But also other collaborators who I'm pleased are here today, Tom Williams, Tim Halliday, Matt Goff, and Nick Sanderland. Through today's presentation, I will discuss several of these works, but the newest work, Home, which is the one in the tented structure, it's still in progress. It's a pilot version, but I would very much welcome your feedback from it. So if you haven't a chance afterwards, do enter that structure and give me some responses to that experience. These video and intimate installation works represent an ongoing interest in how to articulate dance and how we might evoke embodied experience of dancing to viewers and participants. For each in its own way puts me, my body, at the center of the inquiry. To paraphrase Raymond Hugh, I have thrown my body into the fight. Now, I mean no direct comparison between the needs of Hugh's disfigured body and my own, yet it's worth noting the tensions that exist when working from within the bodily and from experiential practices in academia. It risks accusations of indulgence, even narcissism. Yet, as Pellias notes, the subjective bodily experience, and I quote, can be a place where tensions are felt and uncovered, a place of discovery, a place of power, a place of political action and resistance. In taking such risks then, in these practices and through teaching experiences, has led to this reconsideration of dance as a field of knowledge, a configuration that I hope is meaningful within and without the academy. I propose a different approach to dance curricula and pedagogy that recognise the ways in which thinking dwells in a corporeal space. For by approaching dance as a field of knowledge which entails its own structures, giving rise to dispositions somewhat alternative to those currently promoted within the universities, it may be possible to more readily account for and value the variety of ways of knowing that dancing embodies. I've proposed elsewhere that improvised performances are a mode of critical inquiry, a philosophical practice played out in a physical and aesthetic mode. It is these insights I want to elaborate and extend here in relation to the larger question of dance as a field of knowledge might be approached otherwise. So I'm going to do this through 3 questions. So to the first of those questions. Dance has been a discipline in the university, in higher education in the UK for nearly 40 years, following the earlier but no less problematic entrance in the US in the 1940s. This is a very late entrance into academia, and it stems from the social, political and cultural biases that have left higher education unwilling to value the serious discipline that dance is. In response to my call for papers to that SDHS publication that I mentioned earlier, entering the academy, Professor Janet Lansdale noted that dancers, dance students at all levels, and indeed academics, still face incredulity of others and sometimes ridicule at their practice of dance, and particularly the idea that it's worthy of high-level study. And I can personally attest to this. Last week, I had somebody mending my dishwasher. We got into our normal conversation. So it went something like this. What do you do? A what? Dance? I wasn't sure I heard you properly. So what do you do then? What does a professor of dance do? So do you dance then? And they have professors for that. These are fairly typical conversations one might have. I mention Professor Lansdale in particular because not only was she with Professor Alexandra Carter, my PhD supervisor, but it was scholars such as Lansdale that along with White, Brigginshaw and Jordan, for example, fought to establish dance in the British university system. In Adsed's book, The Study of Dance, it focuses on the justification of dance as a subject for a dance study. She argues that dance should be studied in the academy as an art form, other than prior to this it had either only been in physical education or perhaps as part of teacher training. And she proposed a tripart categorization of dance into choreography, performing and appraising. And she writes, areas of study might concern the development of appropriate theoretical structures, the particular characteristics of the medium of movement, and its manipulation into a form, or the criteria of appraisal where relevant to a given dance form. This tripart structure is significant, still forming the basis of university courses across the UK, and is explicitly followed within the GCSE and A-level dance examination structures. She went on to develop, and I'm ahead of myself. Excuse me. Oh, no, I'm not, I'm behind myself. Just a moment. There we go, that's where we should be, I apologise. She went on to develop a detailed method for undertaking dance analysis. And this was the first of those books. In this, she established a model for the minutely detailed examination of dancers, dissecting dancers into particular components and forms. Yeah, we're on that page, good. And she also outlined the important skills of being able to discern, describe, and name dance movement and forms. This book shares similarities with Laban's choreological perspectives, but it promotes a largely semiotic method of interpretation. Whatever its shortfalls, it was an important work for an emerging discipline. The model, however, does tend to position dance as an object and risks a colonizing tendency in which all dancers were subjected to the same modeling system. In a similar period, Susan Foster and colleagues at Riverside in California were developing their own dance program. Susan Foster's book, Reading Dancing, outlines a description, vocabulary, and analysis of tropes and styles. After these initial concerns with analysis and the reading of dance, though, Foster shifted towards thinking about choreography as a strategy for the theorization of dancing. And she postulated approaches in which dancing became a choreographing of historical, social, and aesthetic relationships. Despite Foster's own choreographic work, the model established at Riverside was highly theoretical in focus, drawing heavily upon post-structuralist, feminist, and post-colonial theories, and so had the tendency to reduce the choreographic to metaphor and dancing bodies to ciphers of meaning. And indeed, this tendency continues in much current dance publication, in which the dancing gets lost in the processes of discourse formation. Whilst problematic, though, these models' analysis and ways of looking have been highly significant, providing tools through which dance can be described and discussed. And indeed, I often bemoan the lack of such basic literacy in our dance students. Indeed, when writing my own courses for undergraduates, I have extensively used the models established by Lansdale and Foster and saw them as critical in providing skills in how to see what is in front of you when viewing performance. In my own writing, for example, the book Reworking the Ballet, I extended dance analysis into choreographic and gendered readings of postmodern adaptations of canonical ballets, and presented thick description of the dance works themselves, refiguring the skills of analysis into the frameworks of identity politics. This work was, I now recognise, part of the move beyond the analytical and historical approaches to dance to what O'Shea describes as the second generation. This generation of scholarship was influenced by key insights from other disciplines, anthropology, philosophy, literary theory, gender and sexuality studies, to name a few. Building upon these interdisciplinary approaches, dance moved, and I quote O'Shea again, from the documentation of phenomena to the problematizing of the production of knowledge. Through the inclusion of such perspectives of dance in the academy has developed into a rich tapestry, but the blind spots and colonizing nature of dance analysis, or choreography as cipher, as part of this tripart division of the discipline remain, and the unintentional reinforcement of the hierarchy of theory over practice has been reinforced. So whilst densely woven, the tapestry of the discipline has, oddly one might think, until more recently, tended to overlook the experiences and knowings conceived and elaborated in practice, the very act of dancing. The shift towards practice, as exemplified by Practices research, suggests ways in which meanings and knowledges can be understood and articulated within the dancing itself, often beyond the purview of that which can be read in the dance as text. Robin Nelson, in his extensive writings on practice as research, calls the embodied and experiential approach in which theory might be drawn from practice a liquid knowing. He takes this phrase from artist Marina Abramovich, who writes, "Knowledge comes from experience. I call this kind of experience liquid knowledge. It is something that runs through your system." Using this idea to expose modes of knowledge and the recurring debates around know how, know what, and know that after Gilbert Ryle's, Nelson suggests the practice's research should develop its own criteria towards credibility and rigor, such that its situated, embodied, and haptic nature of coming into knowing might be more fully taken into account. While at times I find Nelson's remains rather conservative in his approach to practices research, the evocative notion of liquid knowing is useful and resonates nicely within me. Weaving an altogether more liquid, bodily relevant approach and valuing what we have learnt through the development of practice as research, I seek a nuanced understanding via the specific modes of knowledge inherent in somatically based improvisation, alongside the development of more sensory languaging strategies in which language and writing is repurposed. At the moment, the taught degree programmes are still largely structured through the tripart model and dominated by the demands of the university and assessment processes. Yet alternative approaches to dance are in full flight as part of doctoral studies and the work of individual artists and researchers, and we have many of them here at Middlesex. What would happen if these artist-researcher insights were to enter our approach to dance more fully, into the very flesh and bones of what we do? It's true to say that improvisation resists conventional academic approaches. It is perceived as being too fleeting, too subjective, too difficult to document, too difficult to evaluate, too insignificant, perhaps. Improvisation, when taught in the university, is mainly located as part of choreography, or sometimes as a feature of dance training. Less commonly, we see it as a performance form in its own right, and even more rarely as a focus of history and philosophy modules. In my own teaching of improvisation, I have sought to develop methods in which the experiential insights of practices of experiential anatomy and release-based movement practices can evolve into a dramatically coherent, reflexive, improvised performance praxis. This requires the corporeal to be treated at least as equally to the cognitive, and the establishment of ways of teaching and assessing that recognise this integration. And as I go on, a few of these areas will recur. So, to our second question. Improvisation comes in many forms, and improvisatory approaches have been employed and developed for far-reaching purposes, such that it is a wide transdisciplinary topic. As a way of going about things, improvisation is everywhere, but it is very hard to see. As a way of operating, we could say that it is fundamental to human existence, and thereby, as George Lewis proposes, improvisation might be said to be as close to a universal, critical, contemporary method that could possibly be responsibly proposed. So, to quote Donald Fishlin, and I'm going to quote him at length here, if improvisation is key to the way which humans collectively adapt, if it is a ubiquitous transcultural practice that underlies the quality of what it means to be human, if improvised discourses articulate ideas only found therein, testing the limits of our capacity to think new thoughts, then there is a profound relationship between to be recognised between improvised music, and I would add dance, and other more expansive discourses in which forms of human agency are at stake. To turn more closely to dance, improvisation is, for many artists, a central approach within the choreographic process. For others, it's a performance form in its own right. and is also a key but often unspoken feature of most social dance forms. We've all boogied on the dance floor in an improvisational fashion. Further, the insights and techniques of improvisation have been developed and utilized in therapeutic and other applied contexts. Yet, whilst so widespread, the histories and significance of improvisation have largely been unspoken. As Susan Foster notes in a reconsideration of dance histories, improvised events have been frequently omitted from the historical record or glossed over as insubstantial or indescribable. While in the 10 years since Foster made these comments, there have been more published materials about improvisation, much still has to change, such that improvised activities remain largely absent from dance histories and discourse, and is generally only visible as a performance form in marginal contexts. This hitherto absence reflects the implicit historical dance hegemony that valorizes choreographed movements over and above improvised ones. So to counter these dominant approaches, here improvisation is positioned not as a secondary or poor relation to the choreographed, but as a highly rigorous activity in that it is an essential part of human existence and interaction. In the dance practices I'm referring to, and I'll just point you briefly to those of you who will know the names to give you a context: Julian Hamilton, Eva Karsak, Rosalind Crisp, Kirsty Simpson, just to name a few to give you some context. Improvisation operates within an international ecology through which practices are explored within and beyond the privacy of the studio, reaching into public performance spaces, often alongside teaching practices. For there is in improvisation a strong pedagogic culture. If we look to the histories of dance, the improvisation forms in these artists can be seen to be often influenced by Africanist forms of movement and music, and Asian sources, in particular ways of thinking and practicing that we see in Aikido and Tai Chi, Qigong. These are combined with practices that arose in the postmodern experimental movement in the States through the Judson Church and Grand Union in the 60s and 70s. These groups and the artisan practices such as contact improvisation that came out of them positioned improvisation in performance as a way of breaking free from the perceived strictures upon the body. Improvisation was seen as part of a mobilization for change, a method of working that destabilized hierarchical relationships and empowered the performer. These were and remain significant political ideals that run as an undercurrent in much improvised work. Yet, as Susan Foster has argued, established discourses unhelpfully reiterated the freeing of the body, historically substituting the terms mind and body with the known and unknown. We read of improvisation as a process of letting go of the mind's thinking so the body can do its own thing. Beyond such positions, though, there is a growing body of dance writing and practicing in which this substitution is understood as a symptom of Western discourse that has failed to recognize that all movement is mindful and that all thinking is an embodied process. In my own practice, I've explored and sought to make evident the nature of improvisation. For example, a work, Trace, Playing Without Memory, and the subsequent Voice, A Retracing, reveal improvisatory thinking that evoke an epistemological landscape at work. Voice, A Retracing, and this is the work that's in the far corner when you want to look at, is a video sound work created in collaboration with Tom Williams and including videography by Tim Halliday. It seeks to capture and articulate my inner experience of movement improvisation. In doing so, the work layers and distorts video images and uses my spoken voice as the basis for the composition. Working from within movement and writing practices, such as were the basis for Voice, A Retracing, themes emerges. And from these, I've suggested an ontology of improvisation. Now, This is a dangerous thing to suggest for such a slippery form as improvisation, but here we go. So nomadism. A recurring feature of improvisation is a commitment and ability to operate with change. As Eva Karsak writes, she is available to constant change. I can balance at the edge of the unknown and experience fearlessness. I've described this openness to change in nomadic terms, for in line with the feminist scholar Rosie Brodotti, the nomad is the kind of subject who has relinquished all idea and desire or nostalgia for fixity. And like nomads, improvisers are comfortable with transition. They do not cling to illusions of permanence or stability, operating along a level of uncertainty between the known and the unknown, between planned and unplanned possibilities. Improvisers work to challenge their habitual patterns, reactions, and perceptions, bringing about differently configured relationships to the body and to space, effectively transforming patterns and hierarchies. They are open to change and the ultimate form of nomad. And as an aside, I just want to point you to something I've been working on for quite some time. It's a woefully out-of-date blog. Maybe once that research assessment exercise is done, I can come back to it. But within this blog, what I've been doing is trying to work out, well, what it really means to be a nomad as improviser, and working that out through tasks, and in that you'll see scores and videos of that work in progress. It'll get up to date one day. Oh, I have changed those to black several times, but I hope you can read them. Convergence, then. Improvisations are a special kind of process in which the creative process and performance are one and the same generative occurrence. For improvisation, composition and execution converge, blurring the boundaries of process and product, research and its re-presentation. As the role of the choreographer and that of the performer and the activities of making and interpreting are simultaneous. For improvisation is a setting in which choreography and the body collapse into one another. Receptivity. Improvisation involves entering a space and believing something will happen. This something is based on listening, initiating, responding, and redirecting. This is a willingness to be vulnerable and assailable to that which emerges in the moment, to catch that which becomes apparent and sparks the imagination. And to quote Eva Karsak again, listening to myself and my surroundings, to the song that arises in this moment in which I am contained. These dancers ride up inside me and spin out beneath me. This receptive state is described by Foster as a vigilant porousness. Novak calls it a responsive state. Paxton, a habit of attention. And Simpson says, you have to be very alert, like an animal, so you can pick up quickly, pick up on movement and emotion shifts. It's kind of becoming hyper alert. Kinesthetic memory. Kinesthetic memory relates to the ability of the dancer to reproduce patterns and movement responses. The improviser develops her skills to become attuned to her movement patterns, enabling her to manipulate and shape her bodily actions in precise ways. And Lisa Nielsen writes, these are all improvisers I'm quoting from, by the way, I made a practice for myself to redirect the shaping or attention of action before it appeared. The instant I felt it become recognizable in my body. The result was as surprising as falling down a rabbit hole. This became a personal technique for provoking new movement patterns, a useful strategy for repositioning my imagination. Irreversibility. When making improvisation, there can be no regrets, no going over, no retouching, no reshaping. It's all part of the mix. So mistakes become openings, for they cannot be crossed out. Rather, improvisers embody failure to work through, to see what happens when you amplify even them. Let them grow. See where the trip, the fall, or the awkward gesture takes you when extended, enlarged, repeated. It cannot be corrected after its end from the outside. Processuality and disappearance. Improvisations are processes in an essential sense, a process that unfolds while being invented. It occurs here and now and vanishes even while it is occurring. Such there is a constant play between appearance and disappearance. The ongoing and developing actions are ephemeral, irreversible, unrepeatable. It arises, is developed while being aesthetically experienced, and then it disappears, never to be repeated. Composition. Whilst much discussion of improvisation focuses upon corporeal connectivity, often positioning improvisation in opposition to choreography, the awareness of form and process of composition are critical. Juniel Hamilton, another improviser, says, "Every moment has the seeds of another movement within it. It is like any life form. It has within it a living structure. It is a strong discipline to follow, a life which has to be manifested at that moment and to not lose it." In the course of an improvisation, continual feedback loops occur as the improviser tracks back and forth, making choices and changes of direction, choosing to stay with something or initiate anew, changing location or relationship to others. These are choreographic actions in the moment. So these recurring features of improvisation bring together different skills of awareness, different knowings. At its best, improvisation is developed through a reflexive process that are activated at the same time of the acts of realization. When dancing, the improviser, it is a high level of attention and arousal, aware of the materiality of her dancing, the potentiality of the structures and actions occurring at that very moment and those that might follow. Thus, the improviser as researcher is an adventurer that draws upon and develops knowledges that are deeply rooted in embodied inquiry. Psychologist Les Todres suggests embodied inquiry is the path by which embodied understanding happens, and that embodiment is where being and knowing meet. Expanding this notion, he draws heavily upon phenomenology and focusing, a process developed by Jen Lynn. And I have Jane Bacon to thank for introducing me to Jen Lynn's work and to our work jointly as the Choreographic Lab. Todres usefully foregrounds the ways in which the lived body, as the messenger of the unsaid, entails a more than, a fertile excess, a world pregnant beyond the known perspective. And he writes, "The life world is never closed or finished or totalized." In reading these words and trying to sense their meaning, it seems to me they could as easily be referring to my experience of improvising. The lived improvising body gives rise to understandings of the textures and aliveness of the fleshy, bodily relevant world that escape easy to define territories. Yet operating in the double realm, improvisers are simultaneously involved in both experiencing and understanding. For the lived body experiences of the pre-reflexive more of a world that is part of and at the same time gives perspective and reflection to this experience. The reflexive improviser isn't someone who merely reflects on their work after the event, but is engaged in a feedback loop in the process whilst dancing. And I think the words of dancer Deborah Hay are useful here. She says, "I notice when I'm on automatic. The more attention I bring to the playing, the finer the gaps acquiring my tension." So when Hay is noticing she's on automatic, in a reflexive mode, This facility enables her, and I quote her again, to pay attention to the practice rather than just experiencing it. Todress might say she is remaining responsively connected to the aliveness of the specific experiential occasion. This reflexive sensibility, a reflection in the midst, as Merleau-Ponty might say, enables the dancer to remain immersed, deepening the kinesthetic experience in a purposeful mode. In small intersecting loops, this embodied reflexivity deepens the experience of the dance. For through this process, it is possible to become more present in more multifaceted ways. This conception of improvisation in which knowledges are created and shared, in which dancers and viewers develop a capacity to perceive that which is emerging, in doing so, dancers and viewers are involved in processes of coming into knowledge, not just of the acts of movement, but the very syntax of what is occurring and what may occur. This is knowledge as process, revealing how physical thinking unfolds in constant shaping and reshaping in fluid frameworks. Improvisation puts into view creativity. So what I'm proposing is that improvisation offers us a practice and reflects embodied inquiry in which being and knowing meet, in which reflexive awareness and criticism is bound within aesthetic choices and reveals itself within the artistic work. And I'll come back to how that model might help us rethink the discipline. So to our third area, and last. As I mentioned earlier, dance analysis models have given us important tools through which to describe and consider dance. They have tended to place, though, dance at a distance. The lived experience of viewing and the felt sense of dancing are oftentimes smudged over, left to one side, considered to be rather messy and lacking the type of objective vision that are required to undertake the serious job of writing. I propose, though, if we consider the role of language and repurpose writing, it might be we can bring writing closer to the bodily and more effectively reflect improvisatory and somatic practices as knowledge as process. Dance improvisers like myself are very interested in language, writing scores, poetry, songs, describing their classes and carefully selecting words through which to evoke, develop and extend their practice. Yet this relationship is not an easy one, for improvisation does not lay easily upon the page. As dance writers Gear and Albright write, more than any other form of contemporary dance practice, improvisation falls beyond the state of language, where images are plumbed from the depths of human psyche and where words do not suffice. Words, though, are nevertheless an important part of assisting us becoming more lucid, more reflexive in our practices. Coming into language is a significant process through which experiential material and emergent forms of knowledge can be foregrounded, processed, and shared. As the poet and writer Lynn writes, language gives structure to awareness. In my work, Dear Practice, which is the back of here, moving gave rise to words. This writing developed as a response to an instruction set by Robert Daniels, a former member of the Choreographic Lab's Articulating Dance project. As part of one of our group events, he suggests that members write a letter to your practice as if it were your lover. For me, one letter became many, as an imaginary dialogue between myself as dancer and as practice evolved. Resonating from this lover's embrace, the letters are intimate, bodily, critical, and emotional. Another work, Script, which is over here, similarly seeks to write from rather than about dancing. This installation was created with Jane Bacon for the Not Dance Festival this year, an international festival extraordinary dance presented by our innovative partners at Dance 4. Script provides an encounter between two people, the host and a participant. The space is a physical and temporal one, which is activated through a quite particular way of being, and uses writing strategies as a prompt towards fleshy words of the unsaid. Collaborative and improvisational, the work continually returns to the body and seeks to draw out the words that reside there. We have written with many people and many artists, and what comes forth has been in turn touching, difficult, playful, profound. The process has personally required me to allow my tensions with writing to be present. The deep weight in the belly be visible in the hesitating movement of my fingers as I hesitate through a dyslexic glare to find the spellings of those words I'm reaching for. As an experiential and improvisational space, script gives voice to these sensations as part of the stumblings and stutterings of writing as improvisation. And perhaps, after all, having to find all their lives alternative routes, dyslexics are some of the best improvisers. Dear Practice and Script both acknowledge the shared bodily process of dancing and writing, and in doing so bring forth the difficulty but absolute imperative of finding good words. These good words, to take us back to Todres, involve naming of experience and sensation, to make fresh lived experience more present. Approaching language anew, writing and dancing as embodied improvisational processes offers a way in which analysis and the important skills of being able to discern, describe and name a thing, to take us back to Ashed's model, might be brought closer to the bodily, and that the types of language used can reflect the embodied experience of moving and watching. In an academic context, this means that the methods, context and purpose of writing as part of assessment and research dissemination processes needs to be rethought. The mechanisms of knowledge production, as evident in publishing, challenged. And in this publication, Choreographic Practices, as co-editor of this, one of the things we've been trying to do is really create a space, a rupture, one might say, in conventional modes of academic publishing, to give voice to different kinds of writing, writing that might be said to come from the inside, come from experience. So to conclude, refiguring dance as an interdisciplinary field of knowledge. To sum up then, dance as a field of knowledge, like any discipline, is a construction. What I've attempted to do is reveal the ways in which dance as a field, as currently constructed, acts as a mechanism to include and exclude particular approaches. Following the now established cultural and theoretical turns in dance studies, I propose it is time we looked again and more closely and more confidently to artistic practices themselves for ways of understanding and organising dance as a field. Taking note of how knowledges emerge from, are situated in embodied contexts and develop improvisationally, and reflecting the renewed recognition for embodied inquiry, alternative structures and pedagogies might be possible. In particular, I've proposed that improvisation, that has long been occluded, might usefully spill out beyond the narrow modular context in which it currently lies, to inspire alternative ways of approaching dance in the academy. This is made possible by taking improvisation out of the margins, by taking improvisation seriously. In doing so, we can refigure the tripart division of dance knowledge embodied in the choreographic, performance and appreciation model. Drawing these three territories into one, not just as a process through which one supports the other, but through a convergent approach in which they cannot be pulled apart, For improvisation requires us to cross corporeal, choreographic, known, unknown, process, product, dancing, languaging, boundaries, promoting a natural and substantive integration within the academic curriculum and a rigorous, systematic mode of inquiry. To finish then, I suggest that both as a methodology and as a paradigm for knowledge as process, improvisational dancing, writing practices and perspectives might soften these established boundaries, putting the heart back in the discipline, into the tissues and sinews of what we do and how we do it. This is important, for to improvise is a crucial part of what it is to be human. Thank you.